Chapter 5. The Trinity. We must now endeavor to understand how man comes into existence amidst this wonderful system of the planes of nature, and in order to do that we shall find ourselves compelled to take an excursion into the domain of theology. Though in such theology as interests us we deal with no pious opinions or speculations, but only with what to us is proved scientific fact. When we search these records in order to discover the origin of man, what do we see? We find that man is the resultant of an elaborate and beautiful evolutionary scheme, and that in him three streams of divine life may be said to converge. One of the sacred scriptures of the world speaks of God as having made man in his own image, a statement which, when it is properly understood, is seen to embody a great occult truth. All religions agree in describing the deity as threefold in his manifestation, and it will be found that the soul of man is also threefold, and that there is the closest possible connection between these facts. It will, of course, be understood that we are speaking now not of the absolute, the supreme, and the infinite, for of him naturally we can know nothing, except that he is, but of that glorious manifestation of him who is the great guiding force or deity of our own solar system, who is called in our philosophy the logos of the system. Of him is true all that we have ever heard predicated of the deity, all that is good, that is, for in these days we hear so very much that is not good attributed to him. Those who profess to worship him frequently attribute to him their own vices, and impiously dare to describe him as jealous, angry, revengeful, and cruel. There can be no shadow of excuse for it among people who profess to be civilized, and those who so malign the fount of all goodness and love are committing a crime whose evil results cannot easily be measured. But all that we have heard of God which is good, the love, the wisdom, the power, the patience and compassion, the omniscience, the omnipresence, the omnipotence, all of this, and much more, is true of the solar logos, in whom, in very truth, we live and move and have our being. And be it remembered that in Theosophy we do not offer this as a pious opinion or an article of religious faith. To the clairvoyant investigator this mighty existence is a definite certainty. Not that any merely human development can enable us directly to see him, but that unmistakable evidence of his action and his purpose surrounds us on every side as we study the life of the higher planes. As he shows himself to us in his work, the solar logos is undoubtedly triple, three and yet one, as religion has long ago told us. There is much that at first sight seems quite incomprehensible in the statements on this subject, which are contained in the old formulas of the Church. Yet when explained by the light of the theosophical teaching, it will be seen that they constitute a remarkably accurate and very beautiful declaration of the truth, even though here and there passages of the most degraded materialism have crept in. The real beauty and meaning of the Athanasian Creed, for example, can be seen only when it is studied verse by verse with the aid of theosophical diagrams. It is obviously impossible to picture this divine manifestation in any way, for it is necessarily entirely beyond our power either of representation or comprehension. Yet a small part of its action may perhaps to some extent be brought within our grasp by the employment of certain simple symbols, such as those adopted in Plate 2. It will be seen that on the seventh or highest plane of our system the triple manifestation of our logos is imaged by three circles, representing his three aspects. Each of these aspects appears to have its own quality and power. In the first aspect he does not manifest himself on any plane below the highest, but in the second he descends to the sixth plane, and draws round himself a garment of its matter, this making a quite separate and lower expression of him. In the third aspect he descends to the upper portion of the fifth plane, and draws round himself matter of that level, thus making a third manifestation. It will be observed that these three manifestations on their respective planes are entirely distinct one from the other, and yet we have only to follow up the dotted lines to see that these separate persons are nevertheless in truth but aspects of the one. Quite separate, when regarded as persons, each on his own plane, quite unconnected diagonally, as it were, yet each having his perpendicular connection with himself at the level where these three are one. Thus we see a very real meaning in the insistence of the Church that we worship one God in Trinity, and Trinity in unity, neither confounding the persons nor dividing the substance, that is to say, never confusing in our minds the work and functions of the three separate manifestations, each on his own plane, yet never for a moment forgetting the eternal unity of the substance, that which lies behind all alike on the highest plane. It is instructive to notice here exactly the true meaning of this word person. It is compounded of the two Latin words per and sona, and therefore signifies that through which the sound comes, the mask worn by the Roman actor to indicate the part which he happened at the moment to be playing. Thus we very appropriately speak of the group of temporary lower vehicles which a soul assumes when he descends into incarnation as his personality. Thus also these separate manifestations of the one on different planes are rightly thought of as persons. Thus we see how it can be said, there is one person of the Father, another of the Son, and another of the Holy Ghost. But the Godhead of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost is all one, the glory equal, the majesty co-eternal. Truly the manifestations are distinct, each on its own plane, and consequently one appears lower than another, yet we have only to look back to the seventh plane to realize that in this Trinity none is afore or after other, none is greater or less than another, but the whole three persons are co-eternal together and co-equal. So also every person by himself is God and Lord, and yet they are not three Lords, but one Lord. See also how clear and luminous become many of the statements concerning the second aspect and his descent into matter. There is another and far wider meaning for this, as will be seen in Plate 3. But what is true of that grander descent is true also of this, for when we think of the aspect on the higher plane as the essential Godhead ensouling the manifestation in matter relatively lower, though still high above our ken, we see how he is God, of the substance of his Father, begotten before the world. But man, of the substance of his mother, born in the world. For as an aspect of the divine he existed before the solar system, but his manifestation in the matter of the sixth plane took place during the life of that system. So, although he be God and man, yet he is not two, but one Christ, one, not by conversion of the Godhead into flesh, but by taking of the manhood into God. One, that is, not only because of the essential unity, but because of the glorious power of drawing back into himself all that has been acquired by the descent into lower matter. But this belongs more especially to that greater descent illustrated for us in Plate 3. The greatest schism which has ever occurred in the Christian Church was that between the Eastern and Western branches, the Greek Church and the Eamon. Although as a matter of fact political and financial considerations were largely responsible for this division, yet the doctrinal reason alleged for it was the supposed corruption of the truth, by the introduction into the creed of the word filioque at the Council of Toledo in the year 589. The question at issue was whether the Holy Ghost proceeded from the Father alone, or from the Father and the Son, surely a point sufficiently unpractical and remote from human knowledge to have been put aside by both parties for the sake of unity. But theological acrimony always seems to rage most bitterly around subjects the most obscure, unimportant, and uninteresting. Our diagram, however, does enable us to see what was the point at issue in this case, and furthermore, it shows us, curiously enough, that both parties were right, and that if they had only clearly understood the matter there need have been no schism at all. The Latin Church held, quite reasonably, that there could be no manifestation on the fifth plane of a force which admittedly came from the seventh, without a passage through the intermediate sixth, so they declared that he proceeded from the Father and the Son. The Greek Church, on the other hand, insisted absolutely on the distinctness of the three manifestations, and quite rightly protested against any theory of a procession from the first manifestation through the second, such as would be typified in our diagram if we drew a diagonal line through the first, second, and third. The dotted line on the right of Plate 2, showing how the third aspect descends through the planes and finally manifests on the fifth, is of course the key to the true line of procession and the absolute harmony of the two conflicting ideas. The wonderful way in which man is made in the image of God may be seen by comparing the triad of the human soul with the Trinity in manifestation above it. So astonishingly material have been the orthodox conceptions that this text has literally been interpreted as referring to the physical body of man, and made to mean that God created man's body in a shape which he foresaw as that which Christ would choose to assume when he came on earth, a rather remarkable instance of mental confusion even for a theologian. A glance at Plate 2 shows us at once the true meaning of those words. Not the physical body of man, but the constitution of his soul, reproduces with marvelous exactitude the method of divine manifestation. Just as three aspects of the divine are seen on the seventh plane, so the divine spark of the Spirit in man is seen to be triple in its appearance on the fifth plane. In both cases, the second aspect is able to descend one plane lower, and to clothe itself in the matter of that plane. In both cases, the third aspect is able to descend two planes and repeat the process. So in both cases there is a Trinity in unity, separate in its manifestations, yet one in the reality behind. But for the moment we are concerned simply with the fact that each of the three aspects or persons or manifestations of the Logos has an especial part to play in the preparation and development of the soul of man. What these parts are we shall endeavor to make clear by the help of the diagram given on Plate 3. The horizontal subdivisions indicate the planes, precisely as in Plate 2, and above them will be seen three symbols belonging to the series described by Madame Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine. The highest represents the first aspect of the Logos, and bears only a centroid, signifying the primary manifestation in our system. The second aspect of the Logos is symbolized by a circle divided by a diameter, showing the dual manifestation which is always associated with the second person of any of the Trinities, while the lowest circle contains the Greek cross, one of the most usual symbols of the third aspect.